Carlsen, the white pieces, moving out his knight.
Yep, it's the Reti opening, as we call it, named after the Hungarian player Richard Reti. And Magnus actually used this already earlier in the Champions Chess Tour, earlier in the Charity Cup. Just a very quiet way of starting the game, very flexible, just keeping your pawns in the centre back for now and throwing them down the board later, just depending on what your opponent does. First, white just getting ready to fianchetto the bishop, just creating a nice home for it. And actually, I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I did play Jorden van Foreest last year in the Mr. Dodgy Invitational. It was a blitz tournament. I played this opening against him every single time with white, just because his openings are too good. Here, you just survive the opening. It's actually very symmetrical, especially if black brings out his knight. It's almost completely symmetrical now, and you just get out of the opening, very stable position, and you go from there. Also, these two faced each other at the beginning of this year in a classical game over the board, and they had a very similar opening to this one, maybe even this exact position. So yeah, I think this is good strategy from Magnus, just taking things very slow at the beginning. No fireworks, because that would only favour the young Dutchman.
Yeah, and you're totally right. They're actually repeating their game from Tata Steel. And that game ended in a draw.
Okay.
And that was one of the most exciting draws I've ever seen. So not all draws are equal, not all draws are boring. That game that they had in January over the board, first Magnus was winning, then he was almost losing, then he was winning again, then he was almost losing. And it was a very deep kind of strategic battle.
Yeah.
So Magnus now just gaining space. This is his kind of trademark move, just gaining space on the queen side with his pawns as much as possible at an early stage.
Yeah, and it is an early stage, actually, to make that pawn move. I mean, it hasn't been played before, even though it is a kind of typical idea in this particular position. I mean, white wants to gain as much space as possible on the left side of the board, and Jorden reacting in a very thematic way, actually, just jumping into the centre with his knight. White has a few options. White can step forward with the king's pawn, reinforce the centre, can also develop the knight to the square in front of the queen, just challenging, putting pressure on black's central knight. And maybe he can use both knights, actually, can go to that square if he wants to be a bit clever. So those are the three main moves.
And it's funny because, OK, until Magnus's last move, we were also following a game of mine against Laurent Fressinet, our guest from that break. So, yeah, I mean, this is...
The universe, you guys.
I know, it's this small bubble of Magnus Carlsen and all his friends just seem to have all... I mean, this is their battleground, basically. And also, I mean, we saw that video of Jorden helping, Laurent helping. I think it's an unwritten rule among friends, among people who study together. You don't play any opening you've discussed in the past, because that's kind of just, that territory is off bounds. You just, it feels a bit sneaky if you have studied something before together and then you use it against your friends. So I think Magnus just trying to get a position that they haven't really discussed together and going from there.
Yeah, this tends to be like the natural strategy when you've studied together. You just choose openings that you haven't worked on. And I remember there's a very famous story in the English chess community between two grandmasters who lived together. And they were playing each other in the British Championships, and they, you know, they whopped out all the lines that they had studied. They'd made all the moves, and they agreed a draw at the end of it. And another grandmaster came and looked at what they played and was like, aha, so that's what you've got prepared. And it was in the days before computers, and he found a hole in their preparation. He found a mistake. And when this grandmaster faced off against our two friends, well, he won.
Both of them?
Yeah, he won that one game, And and after that, they were like, these two friends were like, we are never, ever going to be revealing our prep to anyone. So, yeah, definitely don't reveal your secrets.
Yeah.
Chess players are sneaky, so best not to reveal too much to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also just wanted to mention that even though, you know, we are raising money for UNICEF, we still want to get enthusiastic about the chess. We still want everyone to join in the fun and the conversation. And so we really appreciate it when everyone sends us their questions, their thoughts, and even their selfies. And you can do all this by tweeting us using the hashtag #ChessChamps. And we will feature them on the show if they come at the right time.
And if you have a really cool costume at home, Why don't take a picture of it with you in the costume? It would be, we need some humor as well. We need some good mood as well. We'd love to see you in your costume and the Tinky Winky costume. 2 hours left to make your bid. It's currently only on $111. So you could make a bargain for a very cool costume at the same time, of course, and most importantly, donating money to UNICEF, which is so, so important, you guys. This is the moment to help the people in Ukraine. And we have Kyrre from UNICEF in the studio here. We've been talking about the people, of course, at the border, so many people becoming refugees. But I'm wondering for the millions of people still inside Ukraine and where bombs are hitting, how are parents and people able to protect themselves and protect their children?
I don't know. I mean, it's. Of course, people go into the bomb shelters, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the most important things now is that we also have to in a way demand that the war stops, and also we have to bring up the international humanitarian law, IHL, which is so important. IHL says that you cannot bomb hospitals, for instance.
Okay.
But we have seen more than 30 hospitals being bombed during the war now, and that is a break of international humanitarian law. So we need to talk about these things also, because hospitals are supposed to be safe places in a war.
And and now they're not, and I guess for the UNICEF people on the ground, and also of course for children and mothers giving birth, that is just horrible.
It's horrible.
Yeah. So important, you guys, that we donate and help UNICEF help the people inside Ukraine. We do see some moves coming out. Are all pieces still on the board?
Yes. And usually we'd say that favours Jorden, just because he likes tension, he likes being able to be creative later in the game, and the more pieces, the better when it comes to creativity. But then again, right now, white does have a little bit more space if we look at the pawn structure. Maybe we can jump into the position just to show what's going through both players' minds. So Magnus, he's just manoeuvred his knight around. He used the side of the board, which we don't normally recommend, but the knight is heading back towards the centre. And if white gets one more move, he's actually going to bring his knight even closer to the centre, eyeing up this bishop, also putting extra pressure on black's central pawn. And the reason white tends to have a tiny, at least practical advantage in these positions is because white holds the key to the centre. If you look at these two pawns, if you compare them to black's pawns are slightly more passive. White is the one deciding whether to lock it up by pushing forward later, gaining a bit more space, or whether to trade and just maybe make things completely symmetrical. Black, meanwhile, doesn't want to be the one releasing that tension, because if black ever trades the pawns, it would only help white to establish a strong central influence. So, yeah, right now, just this kind of lock and key tension in the centre slightly favours white. Also, this pawn a bit more advanced than its rival over here. And Magnus likes these things for endgames. If it becomes a pawn race, his pawns are further advanced. So, meanwhile, Jorden, he would like to maybe release the tension in the centre. I can imagine him bringing his rook across, bringing his queen out. OK, he actually retreats his bishop. He's trying to force Magnus's hand. So he's actually putting some pressure on this pawn indirectly. So now he is threatening to win a pawn, but the bishop is a bit of a clumsy piece. It looks like it's just locked behind its own pawns now, and that's the second time he's moved it. He's spent a couple of moves now, and it's still a passive square. So I'm expecting Magnus to maybe just back up this pawn again with his knight, just to give it extra protection with the pawn and knight now, and still very, very tense. Personally, I slightly prefer white here, but anything can happen later on, and maybe Jordan's got ambitious intentions. This is what happened in their game in January. He started throwing pawns down the board towards the white king. So, yeah, very, very tense, and both players spending a couple of minutes so far. I'm expecting them to, because it's so cagey, spend even more time in this middle game with all pieces still on the board.
Mm-hmm.
OK.
And I was just going to point out, that there is a little bit of a trap in the position. White would also, a player like myself would love to push the pawn forward and get my little big clamp into operation. That's my favourite thing.
Not the clam, but clamp.
Clamp. Sorry, I'll stress
No.
But this move isn't really possible because you have a knight takes pawn on the board.
Knight takes pawn, and that utilises the fact that there's actually tension between these bishops. This central pawn for white is actually pinned. So if you go and capture this knight now, your bishop, your dark-squared bishop, will drop. And in the process, black will have won a pawn. It's even better than that for black because this pawn is weak and the bishop pair in the process. So white can't lock things up. As predicted, he has centralised his knight. And now these two knights are just fantastic pieces. Black's knight as well is pretty good right now. But that being said, black does have ways to undermine white's knight. Firstly, by maybe throwing this pawn down the board to try and kick it off its central square, or by utilising this bishop. This is maybe a riskier move because this bishop is on a great square already, as we showed just in that last variation. This is a great diagonal, but you could maybe bring your bishop to the side of the board and hint at capturing this knight. For example, if white just plays a quiet move now, then you could capture this knight and white's pawn structure now is shattered. As we saw in the last game with Pragnananda against Magnus, often having these type of double pawns, it's okay for now, but long term, they could become weaknesses and white's king would be slightly airy. And okay, I'm very surprised by this move, I must admit. Jorden normally plays towards his opponent's king, but here he hasn't pushed on the king side, he's pushed on the opposite flank. And he really hates this tension with the pawns here. He's trying to force white to make a decision. It's all about this guy right now. The pawns just staring down at each other. And if we do see a trade, for example, of pawns on this left side, then at least now pieces are starting to come off. And when you have a space disadvantage like Jorden has, even if it's tiny, trading pieces does help. It gives your pieces more space to work with.
So, Kiddo, when you play in the challenge after this game, will it be a strategy to keep pieces on the board? Is that a good strategy to last as many moves as possible?
I think I'll try to make a bit of a defensive position. So I'll play the Reti probably and castle up and hide in the corner as long as I can. Yeah, no, because it is about lasting as many moves as possible.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we have had one winner in that challenge. 2 minutes on the clock, it's almost impossible. Ginger GM, Simon Williams, was able to win. And David lasted 70 moves, 72 moves.
Oh, I lost though. Oh, I had quite a bit of time left, but I just put my rook on a square and it just got captured. Not my finest moment.
It's good to hear, actually, that it can happen to you.
Yeah, it can happen to anyone.
It happened to me as well, so don't worry.
Yeah.
Good.
So
2 minutes is not a long time.
My advice to you is just to make as many moves as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I would
It's
go
not
for.
about winning because you only have 2 minutes. You don't have increment.
Yeah.
It's just about getting those moves out and, you know, trying not to get checkmated.
Speed is good, and also play Magnus, the app, it does create a lot of threats. So just think, after they've made a move, what's the purpose? If there's something threatened, move it, defend it. If not, then you can just, as you mentioned, this this kind of structure around your king, perfect. You'll last a long, long time.
Yeah.
And, okay.
You know, I like to play this one, as he has done now.
So you like closed positions with lots of pawns on the board?
If I'm uncertain about the opponent, it's a safe way to start.
Oh, good point.
But a few of my mates, of course, I know how they play, right? So I'm quite offensive. I attack immediately. Yeah.
Do you have like chess nights with your friends? Like we know, poker nights is a normal thing. Do you guys have like chess nights?
Not as often as I would like to.
Kids need to grow older. Then you can have the regular chess nights.
Yes, exactly. And also I need to bring them to the chess club so I can actually play more.
Yeah, definitely.
I can tell you, chess nights are very popular in northern Norway.
Are they?
I played a tournament in northern Norway, and I had a lot of people come up to me and said, "Oh, you wrote a book on the Karakana." I was like, "Yes, I did." And they said, "We've discussed it many times in our chess nights."
Oh.
They had many people who were fans of the Karakan, fans of the book, and then there were others who were not fans, and they were discussing between them. They were like testing out with computer analysis, and I was like, wow.
Nice.
Wow, this is really hardcore. But this is how you get better at chess.
And
have those chess nights.
Yeah.
Just order some pizzas in if you like pizzas, and then have as much fun as possible studying the game.
And wine is allowed too, you guys. I would have that. But I mean, that must be the thing, right? Regularly playing, and not only maybe online, but actually making it a social thing.
Oh yeah, no, it's much nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah, to sit with friends. But of course, you shouldn't have too many beers. That's very important.
Of course.
Because then you don't remember anything from what you learned actually that evening.
And of course, you want to win. Now, when you play with your friends, I know, you know, these guys playing in tournaments, so much anger when they lose or play bad moves. Will you get angry when you lose, or is it just a nice thing to be with your friends?
It depends. If I lose because I make a mistake, then I actually get a bit angry.
Yeah.
I'm a relatively bad winner and bad loser. So, because I do gloat and I get angry. So
it's so great to hear that even the great people from UNICEF have some bad qualities.
Yeah. I have to say, one great thing about chess is that the rules are fairly defined and there's no room for argument. Because I do know that my husband and his friends, they play some card game, I think it's called Dominion or something, and there's a lot of arguments about the rules. And with chess, you can't do that. It's all about the moves that you make.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. You lose because of yourself, not because your opponent did something.
Yeah. But then you become so naked as well. It becomes so obvious, right?
Yeah, it does reveal your strengths and your weaknesses. And meanwhile, there have been a load of moves on the board, and there's been some tension clarified on the left side.
Yeah, so we did see a trade of pawns, the first material to leave the board. So now there is at least one open line on the B file. Meanwhile, Black did bring his bishop to the side, as we mentioned, just hinting at the idea of capturing one of the white knights, but that white knight in the middle has been defended. And OK, we're seeing a dance of the bishops. Black's bishop came forward, White's bishop retreated, the Black bishop's retreated. Now will White bring his bishop back where it came from? That will be the second time we've seen this position. I don't think Magnus wants to repeat 3 times and go for the draw. I think he wants to find maybe a different move to maintain the tension. And just by the speed that Jorden went for that, I'm slightly surprised. Maybe he thinks he would be happy to get out of here with a draw. He is Black against the world champion after all, but Magnus, it does give him a chance now to maybe improve one of the white rooks. I'm looking at both rooks. They could be improved. And OK, he brings his bishop out instead, connecting his rooks at least, but it's to a more active square than it sat on previously. And will that dance of the bishops continue? Will Jordan's dark square bishop come out back to the edge of the board to hit White's knight in the centre on the E3 square?
I think he has to do something like that, because otherwise...
he's just helped Magnus improve his position.
Exactly. He's given Magnus a free bishop move. And that's not ideal. And I'd have to say, I do love it when the viewers at home send us their pictures of where they're watching the show from. And we have Cosmon, who is watching from Lisbon Airport, waiting for our flight. I love that. And so a big hello. Hope you make your flight. Looks like you're in good time. And enjoy the travel destination wherever you're going to.
Yeah. Oh, and nowadays, you can probably keep watching on the plane as well, which is nice. Great way to spend a long flight, I would say.
Yeah.
Would it be important to secure the B line here?
Yes.
The white rook to secure the B line, for instance?
That's a really good point. And actually, it's Black's move right now, but I think it will become a fight for this B line. Black's rook would love to occupy these, or at least control these squares. And likewise, if Magnus gets one move, I think it's pretty definite that he's going to plant his rook here. For example, if Black just takes a time out on the other side, doesn't really improve his position too much, then White would love to occupy and maybe even try and enter Black's half later in the game. I think he would love to maybe team up his rooks as well. Plant this rook behind the queen. For example, again, if Black continues not doing much, then we could see the rook come across and White is able to open not just the B line, but the C file as well. We mentioned this lock and key situation. White can open things up by capturing in the center. So again, imagine a situation where White controls these 2 files. It's just going to be one-way traffic here. White controls too much. So that's why I think Jorden is thinking. He's pausing right now because he's wondering how to fight. If he does bring his rook across, I think he's just going to get challenged anyway. And this tension here, it just depends who that favors. The problem for Black as well is that the queen would love to jump forward in order for this rook to enter the game. But if the Black queen ever moves, for example, comes out, then it would drop this pawn. The Black queen is kind of stuck where she is because this White bishop is so strong. So actually, in this position, we didn't see Jorden continue the dance of the bishops, trying to hit this knight. Instead, we saw him retreat his own knight, partly blocking this bishop, as we mentioned, but partly putting extra pressure. He really wants the tension to end. He wants White to commit this pawn, to push it forward, or to trade. And, OK, I just have a feeling Magnus might just try and capture this knight, because now black's pawn structure will be compromised. For example, we see another trade here. These are weak, these are isolated and doubled. And Magnus, he's really kind of attuned to the opponent's pawn structure. Here, long term, these pawns are going to be a real burden for black. So the current position is this one. Maybe Magnus will take this knight, or he could possibly delay it a bit longer, and maybe he'll just give up this pawn, because if you bring your rook across, for example, as you mentioned there, in order to capture this guy, black actually needs to make some trades and would only end up with weak double pawns anyway. So, for example, now white can march forward in the center. White can maybe bring his knight out. We mentioned this fianchettoed bishop. It doesn't look great. It looks like a purely defensive piece in the current position, but suddenly it could well come to life on this diagonal. It has some targets now. So really tense, but it is all about this pawn, first of all, whether white wants to move it or allow it to be captured, and then the open files. And yeah, it's still very tense, but things slightly turning in Magnus's favor, maybe because black's starting to retreat pieces on every turn, and Magnus might be the first to occupy good squares with his rooks.
I was just counting pieces. How many are there?
It's all of them on the board. There've only been one set of pawns traded each.
Yeah. Well, in 17 moves. How rare is that?
That's pretty rare. I think I once played a game that was 30, 40 moves before the first pawn got exchanged, but that is almost once in a lifetime type of thing. So,
wow.
Yeah, here it's just the nature of the position. This is exactly the strategy that Magnus went for. That's why we talk about white having the advantage, because as white you can choose open Sicilian, really aggressive, or you can choose the Reti, just maybe slower, passive game. And yeah, not that passive here for Magnus, but
no.
He really wants to do something. I think they will get the itch. As we pass move 20, both players will want some action.
Yeah.
In rapid chess, you can't just maneuver forever. You need to do something.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say, with so many pieces being on the board, is that often this encourages the players just to use up the time on the clock, because they're thinking about every single possibility. There's lots of pieces to activate. There's some potential captures. I mean, and you have to think about the best plan. And again, like David mentioned, it's very difficult with this tension, and it keeps increasing. And often one player will crack, like you said, and that's it. The position will heat up. And David really summed it up, like my chess, you know, at move 35, that's when everything hits the fan, and normally I have no time on the clock. And this is when blunders happen. But I mean, yeah, just wait for it. This is just a storm brewing in a teacup, as we say.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made the analogy a couple of days ago. It's like a staring contest. Both of them are just staring at each other. Neither really wants to break eye contact or kind of flinch first. So yeah, who's going to blink first? Is it going to be Magnus?
Actually, I got a tip from Askild, which is a great chess player as well, once, that you always want your opponent, so this was a tip for beginners, have your opponent make the first trade, take the first piece, especially with the pawns, because then maybe, you know, he's the one forced to have the doubled pawns, for example.
Yeah. They're the first ones to maybe give ground.
Yeah.
They also have to spend time doing that. They have to spend the first move doing that, so you have a move before to maybe get yourself ready for the tension to break. So yeah, in general, make sure every capture or every trade is on your terms.
Yeah.
Make sure that when you recapture, you improve your position, or that your opponent worsens their position when going for that trade.
Yeah.
And plus, at my beginner level, I start, if they're not taking my piece, you know, I get so insecure. Wait, why are you not taking this piece? What am I missing? And then I spend all my time.
Yeah. I once played a kind of pairs chess game with. You kind of play with partners, alternate moves. You were there actually, Kaya, and I play with beginners, and the opponent put the queen on a square. It could just be taken for free. And they didn't take because they were following that rule. They were thinking, OK, I shouldn't make the first capture. It must be a trap.
Yeah.
Taking a free queen, it must be a trap. So, OK, meanwhile, a couple of moves. White's rook actually brought itself to the center. That's surprising, not occupying the open file. I think occupying the open file would have been by far the most natural choice there. Instead, White's rook came to the center, maybe in anticipation of things kind of blowing open in the center, all the pawns getting traded. But then Jorden, he's maintaining the tension, just pushing a pawn. And, OK, the action has started.
It's
Magnus.
going, yeah. It's beginning. Look at that white knight is in the center of the board, and it's also in Jordan's territory. And I think that was a reaction, actually, to Jordan's last move. It looked like a really innocuous move. just to make some air for the king. But in actual fact, it could have been signalling something very sinister under the surface. It could have been signalling my favorite thing in the world, a pawn storm. Maybe he might not have done it, but yeah, just pushing those pawns forward. And Magnus has said, right, I'm not waiting for this. I want to do something. And now Jorden has a question, you know, is he going to capture the knight? Unleash the rook sitting on the D1 square? Is he going to, yep. And suddenly there's an incredible amount of tension on the pawn. I don't think you can play this at all. This knight is just not touchable. Another move is to defend the pawn that's under attack, and that's what Jorden has done. He's defended the c6 pawn.
Yeah, so he's brought his rook across, but okay,
Ooh.
yeah. Now Magnus has captured this black knight, and I think we're going to see some trades here. And look at this, Magnus is just simply going to play strategic chess, positional chess after this capture. No matter which way black takes back, okay, he actually takes back with a bishop. Now we see a trade of pawns, and this pawn structure I mentioned. Okay, we don't see a trade of pawns. I was going to say white is just going to move the queen, and these two pawns are just going to drop off. You look at this guy; it's attacked once, twice, 3 times. And instead, anticipating this, Jorden has actually sacrificed a pawn. Automatic recapture, I assumed, would happen, but no, he pushes forward. And this is really clever, actually, from the Dutchman, because now he's opening up his bishops. And I think we'll see Magnus start shaking his head, because now, after a trade here, all of black's pieces have improved their quality. This bishop hitting this pawn, this bishop kind of got its laser vision along this diagonal, and also the black rook becoming super active. So Jorden, we talked about how he likes to sacrifice pawns. He's been working with Daniel Dubov, remember?
Yeah.
As part of Magnus's training camp. Dubov, the ultimate pawn sacrificer. And suddenly, black has the better pieces. And look at that, the evaluation bar all in black's favour. Look at this, the black bishop's coming to life. Black winning the pawn back. This one has turned completely. Magnus has lost control. And wow, Magnus has even sacrificed material. He's just given up his rook for a bishop. And wow, I think Jorden might win this game. If you do a quick count, black has a rook for just a knight and a pawn. So knight and a pawn worth 4, the rook worth 5. And it's not just that, but look how many open lines the rooks have. Black's rook is going to swing across to a completely open file. The queen and rook on a completely open file. Wow, Magnus just, I don't know what's happened to him there. I can't really explain it. He just underestimated the force of black's bishops.
Wow.
This bishop as well. Look how open it is on this whole diagonal. Look how blocked white's bishop is staring at its own pawn. So this one is very one-sided now.
And apparently some big reactions on Magnus while these moves were happening. Look at this. Frustrated. What is that about, David?
I think he, just like me, he missed that pawn move earlier. He just assumed that there would be a recapture where white would have been in complete control. But instead, Jorden just gave up a pawn in order to open up his pieces, improve the quality of his pieces. And that was the reaction we saw. Magnus just annoyed at himself for missing that one move. It was an easy one to miss. I think I missed it as well. But yeah, either way, he has high standards. And OK, he's at least speeding up now. He's trying to put pressure on the clock. But white's knight has to retreat to a really sad square just to avoid being captured by black's bishop. Black can even bully white now that he is ahead on material. He can offer these trades constantly, and white's going to have to run away from them because white's bishop and knight will not be able to compete against the black rooks later in the game.
Black's pieces are just overwhelming, and doesn't really help that the two rooks have these beautiful lines, and especially they can go on to the second row.
Yeah.
Bad news for Magnus.
That's the thing, it just turns in one move. And,
yeah, it was like a collapse, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was almost like when we saw that video footage of Magnus, like it was almost like he made a mouse slip or something. Something went wrong, and just he was so frustrated with himself. I mean,
maybe we'll have to ask him later what the reaction was about. I didn't see any mouse slip.
No, I would just went through.
Blunder.
There was no way that he could have done a mouse slip, but it was just like, such frustration. And wow.
And we have, so Ty, the stats guy, actually before this round sent a message saying that because Jorden van Foreest won against Ding in the last round, that Jorden van Foreest had a better chance to qualify for knockouts than Ding Liren. And beating world number 3, do you think he's now going to also beat world number 1?
He's got to be a big favourite. If Jorden doesn't win from here, he will be beating himself up just about it. I mean, this is not just a big advantage, but it's very one-sided traffic. Look at White's knight. It's had to kind of contort itself, plant itself on the side of the board purely on a passive square. White's pawns, you don't want to throw them forward. You can't push them because you just weaken yourself. The black rooks are starting to take control. And, OK, White's queen as well, a bit offside on the edge of the board, not really helping out. I think, yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if Jorden doesn't win this one, to be honest. The only hope for White is that maybe he can swap off the queens, swap off one set of rooks and hold what we call a fortress, where he just covers everything, especially with his bishop on the light squares, and he just hopes and prays that black can't break through. White does have a pawn advantage after all, so it's going to be hard for black if queens and rooks do come off to maybe create a passed pawn later in the game to win the endgame. So, OK, meanwhile, White's still a long way from salvation here. And black's rook, as we mentioned actually in a previous game, on the second rank, that's where the targets lie. Look at all the pawns, look at White's king and knight.
Yeah, I think White's only chance is just to be really obstinate and just defend, and just frustrate Jorden and just try to provoke a rash reaction. So maybe Jorden's like, where's my breakthrough? Why am I not winning this? And maybe, you know, Jorden can give back material or something just to clarify the position. And there, Magnus gave the, well, put his queen to the 8th row, and Jorden just simply retreats his bishop. Because there is no clear-cut way, right, how to break through. It's just about improving. Yeah,
just maximise the black rooks, maximise the black queen and bishop, and then look for the breakthrough. But I was going to say, Magnus's move, putting the white queen on the top of the board, that's the type of move that's intended to scare the opponent, but it's much more effective in over-the-board chess when you move your queen deep into their position on the board. But in online chess, you realise, actually, the queen's not really doing much there. It doesn't visually look so scary, and White's queen just hitting pawns that are easily protected.
And now the queen's cut off from the defence of her king, so nice move from Jorden there.
Yeah, and I think his next move is nearly automatic. Black's king is just going to slide across to the dark square, because dark squares are where black is most solid, and black's king will be very safe next to its pawns. Meanwhile, at least Magnus is activating his knight. I'm not so sure I like the fact that that has been allowed. But then again, the knight maybe can just be locked out of the game later on. Meanwhile, as predicted, black's king on a dark square. If your opponent has a light squared bishop, just put your king on a dark square. Just to frustrate them, it will never really be in trouble. And, OK, the white knight has at least broken free. Knight's in the centre. I mean, it's much better now than it was 3 moves ago. So how will Jorden react to this? I think he's going to put his rooks on the 2nd rank.
That's for me the most natural move. And
both of them,
yeah, just put both of them on the 2nd row. And no, well, Jorden decides, no, that white queen is just a little bit too annoying, so he chases it away.
So the white queen back where it came from. The black rook now under fire from white's knight. So that will move. You can gain even more time against the white queen if you want to.
It's tempting, isn't it? Attack her one more time. And this time, instead, Jorden decides to ask White, wait, you want to trade rooks? White probably will say, no, thank you.
I think...
Or maybe you have to, actually.
OK. Why do you have to here, Jovanka?
Because I'm slightly worried that black might be able to, at some point, double the rooks along the bottom row. And
you have to be really careful here as Magnus Carlsen, because that's exactly where black is trying to break through. On the 2nd row, it looks nice, but white's bishop is actually covering a lot of squares, covering some important pawns. And maybe we can show this, because I think Jorden has finally found a winning plan, or at least he's hoping that this is a winning plan. As mentioned, this rook is protected, so you don't necessarily need to trade yet. But at some point, the rooks will come off, and this is where black is trying to break through on the 1st rank. The rook is going to come down, and you're going to sneak behind the white king to try and deliver checkmate. For example, if the white queen tries to counterattack, whoops, it's too slow, it's too late. Black now is the one who's just going to sneak behind, and it's going to be checkmate very, very shortly. So, yeah, it's all about the 1st rank. Can white hold his ground? It doesn't look that way, because no matter what, black's rook is about to enter. And using this teamwork, white's rook alone cannot hold the fort. It's looking very grim for Magnus Carlsen. So he does trade, and now he has to be very, very careful of this idea of the rook coming down. And, OK, has he moved? No. It looks like this move is a monster threat right now. Wow.
What an interesting round this is heating up to be. Richard Report has already won his game against Lai Ching-ji. Eric Hansen is looking really good for him against Gwaine Jones, who is really struggling in this tournament. And look at that, Hare Krishna, the bar all the way over to his side in the game against Liam Le. So Liam could be about to have his first loss in the tournament. He's played fantastic so far. Oh, but the bar just went down. Maybe he can save that draw.
Well, it means it's a sharp position, potentially, or maybe not. Definitely. I mean, one of the great things about Hari Krishna is that he made a pledge on Instagram that he was going to be donating 10% of his winnings to the UNICEF fund.
Yeah, fantastic by Hari Krishna. And I also know other players are donating prize money to the UNICEF cause. We are currently on more than $50,000. We have set the aim to $75,000. Would be great to make that today or tomorrow. Please, with anything you can contribute with, please donate to help UNICEF, help the people in Ukraine. So important that we come together. All right, so moves, David. Do you think Jorden will win this now?
Looks likely, and there's actually a checkmate in one threat on the board.
Wow.
Black's queen wants to zoom across actually to the corner square, the H1 square, and that would be checkmate. The white king would be trapped, and the rook protects the black queen. So white's king has to move out the way, using the white bishop as a defender on the light squares, covering that corner square now with the white bishop. And also, if there are any checks, the white bishop maybe is able to drop back and block. So white's king finding a safe haven temporarily on the edge of the board, on the light square, but long term, it looks like that king shouldn't really survive. Black's queen can give an annoying check right now. Actually, if you could kind of switch the queen and rook over, maybe Jorden will try and spend a few moves doing this, but if you could switch the order of the black queen and rook, the black rook would be able to go and sacrifice itself in the corner, and the black queen would follow up, delivering the checkmate later on. So it's just about arranging that type of idea. Maybe at some point the black bishop will actually join in and sacrifice itself for a pawn just to open things up around the white king. There's no immediate win. There's no immediate breakthrough. So Magnus, I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all made mistakes, blundered, got losing positions. He's just trying to be tenacious and making it as difficult as possible for Jorden, especially now that they're both around the 3-minute mark. We could still see a turnaround. If black is careless, then the white knight might jump forward. The white queen has actually got some attacking purpose. So here I would probably just give a check with the black queen just to see what white has in mind, but he retreats the whole way up the board, giving a different check, different angle, and the white king now will retreat.
Yeah. I'm not sure I like this move, actually. I mean, I know it's a nice move, nice safety first move, but I kind of thought it would be a good idea to ask the white queen a question. She's quite well placed on the A7 square, defending and attacking at the same time, but I'd like to kick her out.
Yeah, so maybe the black rook could go to the corner, kick her out vertically.
And then initiate my plans.
Yeah, the black rook could retreat, but you kind of want the rook on the first rank anyway. That's where you're going to make your breakthrough eventually. I just don't like the fact that the white knight now is actually well placed, because the white knight defensively doing well and has some aggressive intentions. I think Jorden could have maybe reached this type of position, but with white's knight still passive as it was earlier.
And taking under 3 minutes, Jorden van Foreest, he seems like he's itching to find a great move, maybe heading into an endgame.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he's slightly frustrated with his position, because it does feel like he's super close, but it's not close enough, because as David's pointed out, the white knight is perfectly positioned. It's it's a great universal piece, both offensively and defensively. Also, the same goes with the white queen. And this just means that the job is still not done. The game is not going to win itself. Jorden still has to play good moves. And, he decides that the queen is bothering him, so he wants to offer a trade. There's no way that Magnus will accept that trade.
I don't know if I
you think he will?
I mentioned 5 minutes ago, I think White's dream scenario is just taking the queens off the board and hoping that it's a fortress. I don't see any breakthrough there for black.
Okay.
And there we go, he takes the queens off. I think maybe you could have kept the queens on. It's still not clear how black was going to win and how black was going to checkmate, but this is a good practical chance. With opposite colour bishops as well, white can hold the light squares. White will definitely be able to hold the light squares. And how is black ever going to create, firstly, a passed pawn? How is black ever going to trade things off? It's not possible with opposite colour bishops. And how is black going to get his king active? It's going to take an age for black's king to get anywhere to help the rest of its pieces. So, OK, black's rook just sitting on an annoying square, first of all, keeping an eye on a couple of pawns. But now Jorden, he was frustrated earlier with the queens on the board, finding a winning plan, I think he's going to be even more frustrated now. He can try for the next 50 moves, but he's still an age away from creating any kind of disturbance to the white pieces. And also, the white knight, if you have a kick it away, pushing a pawn, the white knight will jump into some even better squares. So.
Well, the bar is still liking it for Jorden van Foreest. I guess this is quite hard to play, though. And, well, Kira, how are you with end games? Do you often get to the end game?
Yeah, and I like them the best.
Oh.
Yeah, if I have good time. Because that's when I feel challenged. That's when I can think. I'm a bit stressed when there's too many pieces.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's too much to think about. So a situation like this, I would love.
And then,
good man after my own heart.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, getting the pieces off so you don't have to think about too much at all times. But then again, having some time on the clock to actually think about what to do. And Magnus is laughing here. What is that about? He often does that. And does he often play bad moves after that, David?
Yeah, we've noticed a pattern. Yeah. Magnus often struggles after he's been eating noodles, as we've seen, and after he laughs to himself. There's often a mistake coming after that, maybe just losing a little bit of focus.
Highly unofficial, what do we call it?
Analysis.
Analysis by us, yeah.
We haven't checked out the stats. We just admire him laughing. And, it's a feeling. And, OK, meanwhile, maybe he's been laughing just because he thinks he's got away with it. Maybe he thinks he's got out of jail. But a long battle ahead. Note how white is just going up and down with the king. Magnus is going to try and do that forever because the white bishop can't move. The white knight is on it's on a decent square. And the one thing you don't want to do with white is push any pawns because actually that would just leave weaknesses behind. At the moment, white's pawn structure, they all defend each other. They're defended by their bishop. If you push pawns forward, the black bishop might be able to start targeting things.
Yeah, I think I figured out what he was laughing about. I think it's an inside joke. I mean, during the team, there's a lot of banter. Maybe there was some joke about, Jorden not being great at endgames or something. And so he's like thinking back to that, laughing.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Probably.
And then, yeah.
I mean, there's only one punching bag in this endgame, though, and that's Magnus. So roles have reversed. And yeah, Jorden, I did mention just before the game as well, endgames, it's his one area maybe. I've played him a few times in classical chess over the board, and every time I've taken it into drier endgames, I've managed to win. He's held a couple of draws, but in that blitz match as well, every time I just tried to swap the queens as early as possible, and I was able to knock him out of that tournament. So endgames is his one area, maybe. And still, I mean, this is a difficult endgame because it's not conventional. It's not a typical kind of pawn race with pawns racing up the board that you can calculate. It's not a typical position that you can just memorize because this is still, I mean, lots and lots of pieces on the board. I don't think either player has had anything similar to this in their careers. It's very much purely about the planning long term. Where does black's king want to be when he pushes pawns? Where does black's bishop want to be? Where does the black rook want to be as well? And well, okay, he does push a pawn. I just said, don't do this. And I'm wondering why. Maybe he thought he needed to do it eventually, but now the rook can come down to the second rank. All of white's pawns on the right half of the board now, they're on dark squares, so they are actually targets. This is surprising to me. But maybe he thinks the black bishop doesn't have any good kind of avenues now to annoy the white pawns, to attack the white pawns. And there's also no way forward for the black king.
Well, it's a deep analysis there because I would not have pushed that pawn as well because white's pawn structure looked so compact and so well defended by the light square bishop. Now it feels a little bit shaky, especially if a black bishop were to get to the e1 square, and this is why Magnus puts his king on the f1. But okay, black still has lots of plans. He can mobilize the king. Another one would be, just do a little bit of a journey and try to support a pawn advance.
Yeah, so two possible winning plans here for Jorden. This game's going to go on a long, long time, I feel. Two potential winning plans. You mentioned one of them there, Jovanka. It's actually to retreat the black king, to actually plant it on this square. For example, if white waits, OK, he's not going for this yet, but if white waits, you plant the king here, and then eventually you start pushing your pawns. And slowly but surely, you want to connect the pawns so any pawn capture is met by another pawn capture. And again, if white waits, then suddenly, at least you're making progress. You're maybe going to trade a pawn, maybe going to dislodge this white bishop. Lots of moves happening, but not changing the nature of the position. So let's just discuss the plans. So black could push pawns. This is plan one. And then plan two, the one I'm maybe slightly more attracted to, but is harder to achieve. If we go back to the current position, is to go on a bit of a king march. OK, he's going for plan one, I think. Bring his king to the side you have to defend this pawn first before you push pawns. I was going to say, plan 2 was to go on a king march. You go round the whole way. You might have to take the long route round, but then eventually start creeping into white's position, maybe from the side, and use the king as another attacker. But it's not clear whether you could achieve that, whether you have enough time. And meanwhile, if we catch up with play, this is the current position. Note how the knight is just keeping an eye on these pawns. If you ever push them, for example, if white waits, if you ever push these pawns, then you just leave holes, here for the white knight to jump into. And okay, a maneuvering battle has commenced. We're going to be here. Do you think 100 moves, Jovanka?
Yeah,
it's
I think
58
so.
now.
I suspect that Jordan's going to go for plan 1. And when it doesn't work, he will now go for plan 2 and march the king on its odyssey and try to see how far up the board it will go. And then, if it doesn't get very far, perhaps agree a draw.
Never.
Never. Okay,
Fight
yes.
for that win, Jordan. Yeah, I would maybe do it the other way around, because pushing pawns is more committal. Once you've pushed pawns, they won't retreat, they won't keep each other safe anymore. So I would maybe start by bringing the king the whole way around. If there's no way for the king to get in, then I would go back the whole way with the king and then push the pawns.
But then you might have reached move 50.
Oh, I'm not so sure. Chess is a long game. 50 moves is a long time. So, okay, meanwhile, rook's moving, king's moving. Also, Magnus did push a pawn on move 52.
Okay.
So if there are no more pawn pushes or captures for the next 40 moves, by the time we get to move 102, it's a draw. So he has 40 moves in order to arrange a pawn push. That's enough time. Even if he dances around with the king for a while. And there we go, the king's going, is it going the whole way around?
Here you go.
Here we go.
Clearly.
And he's using the dark squares, just avoiding any potential checks from the white bishop. And it's a long, long way to get into the heart of white's position. And even if the black king, if you could pick it up and put it maybe on the d2 square, it's still not attacking anything. So at least it's a plan to maybe annoy Magnus, disrupt his defensive formation. And here we go, Magnus just moving his bishop, not committing yet.
Okay, well, we'll see the king move a little bit. No, the rook improves itself to a dark square. Very safe.
Yeah, everything on dark squares is a logical setup for black. And Magnus is just going to sit and wait.
And look at Jorden, he can definitely feel the pressure. 1 minute and 42 seconds left on the clock. How big would it be for Jorden to win this game? I mean, has he ever beaten Magnus?
Off the top of my head, I can't recall a time that Jordan's beaten Magnus,
No.
At least in a tournament game. Maybe in their sparring sessions at training camps, he's won a few games here and there. But
Yeah.
no, Magnus is still very much top dog, I think, in this rivalry. Jordan, maybe he's actually the bogeyman, the kind of kryptonite for Anish Giri. He's beaten him a few times in Vaikanze, but Magnus is a different kettle of fish. So I think a big, big game for Jordan, a meaningful one, if he gets the win.
All right. Well, good news for him. Magnus Carlsen is now thinking 1 minute. A bunch of games have ended. Richard Report has won his game. Eric Hansen won the game against Gawain Jones. And then 2 other games is also still going on. It's looking good for Jan Christoph Duda against Ju Wen-jun. And the bar has been to Navarra's side all the time in the game against Pragnananda. But maybe the young Indian player is saving a draw in this game. We'll keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, and meanwhile, just one bishop move by Magnus. Not changing things too much. Jordan, yeah, moving his rook there. We are getting closer to that 100 move mark.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely. And the one problem for black is if he does bring his king the whole way around, if there's no way through, and if he has to bring the king the whole way back again, by then we might have reached move 80, 90.
Yeah. And Magnus is proactively stopping the king from marching because he's put his bishop in the eye line of the E8 square, which will be the square that targets the black pawns.
Yeah, and really sneaky here from Magnus. There is a bit of a, well, I won't say trap, but there is a trick. So he's offered up a pawn as bait in the centre of the board. Black's rook on the d-file can actually go up and capture white's pawn in the middle. But then the white bishop would just drop back 1 square. And once the rook moves, the white bishop's going to start taking black's pawns on the king side. Black's pawns all on light squares, if you notice. So maybe we can just show this on the board, because Jordan, you saw him, just for a moment, he thought that Magnus had blundered. But this is too simple a position for Magnus to blunder. If black takes this pawn in the centre, then the bishop does Okay, he's done it. The bishop does drop back, and we're going to see a skewer here. And okay, this is a rook check. The king now, is it going to move? Wow, we could see a really weird scenario. The king now, if it goes this way, black has time to defend his pawn with his king. If it goes this way, okay, this is really heating up now. The rook's going to come across and attack the white knight. Suddenly not so easy at all.
But could the rook get trapped?
There's chances the rook might get trapped. I mean, it's in no man's land right now. You could even see a situation where white even, for example, grabs a pawn and then, okay, he hasn't gone for this, and then just retreats with his bishop.
Yeah, this is what I was worried about.
The rook cannot actually move, but maybe black can break his rook out of jail by taking some pawns. So, okay, white's knight did move. Maybe Magnus tried to be a bit too clever. I was praising him, but in this position, his knight was under fire. He brought it forward. Now Jorden has kept his pawn safe. And suddenly black has won a pawn in the process. This pawn that in the center of the board has just disappeared. Still some chances for white because these pawns are vulnerable, especially to the white bishop later on. But, okay, Jorden must be very confident about this
serious leap forward, and it definitely will be affecting the flow and the momentum and also the psychology of the players, because Magnus will be feeling that he's on a bit of a downward spiral.
And now this rook is under attack. Black just needs to move it somewhere safe, put it on a dark square, and again, the knight attacked. Suddenly, it's equal number of pawns, so black has made a huge leap.
Do you think he's winning now?
I think objectively, if it was two computers against each other, I think black would win.
Okay.
But this is very much a human game. So still some chances for white, and it's going to still take a long, long time for black's pawns to push. I think we've chosen the longest game of the round, maybe of the Charity Cup so far.
Wow.
And okay, a check from Magnus. The black king is going to move, and I think Magnus's idea is to actually use the white knight and put it in the corner of the board, the h8 square, to go after some of black's pawns, because the one thing Magnus doesn't want to do is trade off his knight for the black bishop. Swapping pieces here would only make things easier for black. So black's king under check.
And where to move to, because the most natural square is to put it on a dark square, attack the knight. But when the knight goes to the corner of the board, it will move with check from that square.
That's exactly why Jordan's hesitating. And maybe he chooses a good square on a light square, so not ideal, but at least there are no knight checks in the near future. Valuation bar, though, not a fan. I think Magnus has to try and remove pawns from the board as quickly as possible, because if black gets organised now, it's just a matter of time, and he does go into the corner. And yeah, don't try this at home, anyone. Never put your knight in the corner unless you really, really have to, unless there's a specific purpose. But at least now black's pawns, they have been forced to step forward, so they are loose on the light squares.
But I do hope Kira tries out this tactic in his charity game. 73 moves here. That would be quite a big donation for UNICEF.
Yes, that would be.
So, okay, so what is it from this game that Kira can sort of take into trying to just get as many moves as possible on the board?
I think we've already discussed it. It's all about that safe king for white.
Yeah.
Keeping the white king safe in this opening structure, even if things go wrong like they have for Magnus. I mean, you can survive 75 moves maybe. Get the queens off as well in general, if you're unsure. And yeah, just keep everything protected. That's what Magnus is doing right now.
And Jorden, the clock is ticking down under 20 seconds, and he has to make a move. I mean, the great thing about his position is he can make some random pass moves like he's doing right now with the bishop.
Yeah.
And, OK, so this bishop move doesn't really do anything, but it does have one tiny threat, and that is that the white king cannot move to the second row.
Yeah, so the white king has to stop the black bishop from coming behind the white pawns and starting to capture them. Then they'll just start falling like dominoes. So, OK, the white bishop, meanwhile, hitting black's only pawn on the light square. And this is annoying for Jorden because he could block the attack of that bishop, but then once the bishop moves, black will have two. He does this. Black now has two pawns on light squares, though, and they're going to be hard to defend. White's knight now threatens to drop back and start attacking those pawns. OK, the bishop forced to drop back itself. Suddenly, those pawns on the right side, they are vulnerable to white's bishop. OK, it does feel like Magnus, as soon as he dropped that pawn earlier, he's been working his magic once more. He didn't go for the passive just sit and wait technique that we were advocating. He's actually trying to make things happen. He's trying to force the draw, maybe playing on Jordan's clock time.
And I just want to mention, you guys, a big result. Ju Wenjun winning her first game in the tournament against Jan-Christoph Duda. Wow, I've been just looking at the bar in that game. It's been going from side to side. Eventually, Ju Wenjun getting her first win. That's great.
Excellent news.
Yep.
And of course, Jan Christoph Duda is a fantastic player.
Really
so
is.
It is a really wonderful result. I hope it's the start of a pattern for Ji Wenjun.
Yeah.
Would love to see her do really well.
And actually, the women's world champion there, she ended the game with checkmate. She checkmated Duda on the final move, trapping his king in the corner. So
You like it.
great result for her. And OK, meanwhile, big development in this game. We are seeing that trade. Earlier, I said the white knight definitely doesn't want to trade off for the black bishop. And usually that's the case. But now the white bishop is able to go for these black pawns. And yeah, this is why maybe Jorden should have tried to prevent, or should have tried to kind of restrain his own pawns, not put them on the light squares. And OK, Magnus is starting to eliminate the material. If all of the pawns disappear, by the way, if white's 4 and black's 3 disappear, rook against bishop is a simple draw. Well, I say simple, still possible to lose it, but at this level, Magnus would be able to hold.
Ooh, he puts another pawn on the light square. I was a bit surprised by that one because I thought maybe a king would love to be on that square.
Yeah, really committal from Jorden. I'm not sure he's going to look back on that decision fondly, putting all of the black pawns now as targets for the white bishop. And Magnus, he's just fixed his bishop where it is. So now that bishop eternally is going to attack the black pawns. One of black's pieces, the king or rook, will be stuck defending them. And Magnus is just going to wait with his king forever. And there we go. It's the waiting game again. And Magnus leaning back. Body language, he thinks he's making the draw.
I honestly don't see a way forward for black because, you know, the king is forced to keep an eye on the pawn on h5. The rook is not going anywhere by itself. It needs teamwork. And, of course, the rook is also tied down to the defence of the light-squared pawns. So I just think they're going to repeat moves.
Yeah, and white is never going to run out of moves and reach something we call zugzwang, where every move white makes would worsen his position because he can wait with the king or with the bishop. And, OK, this is the second time we've seen this position. We're about to get the draw. And there we go. Magnus miraculously holds.
And shaking his head, Magnus Carlsen, eventually, though, after being in big trouble, he saves a draw against Jorden van Foreest.